Welcome everyone to our fifth webinar of our new format for delivering presentations to our Wagner Society of Northern California. I want to thank you all for registering to be with us today. It's my deep pleasure to be welcoming Maestro Jonathan Khuner here. And I think everybody in the Bay Area knows Jonathan Khuner quite well. He's been a musical tour de force, as it were, for so many years here, working with Berkeley Opera, which is now West Edge Opera, and conducting in other various opera companies around the Bay Area. Soon, with pocket opera in Das Liebesverbot. And so I will keep that short because he got introduced in our registrations and invitations that we sent out. And at this point in time, I'd like to welcome Jonathan Khuner.
Thank you, Terry. Can people hear me now? Am I on? All right, I believe that I'm broadcasting now. Is that true?
Yes, it is true.
And I will take off my earphones. And welcome everybody. I'm very happy to be here, and I want to thank the Wagner Society and also Pocket Opera for asking me to conduct the upcoming, we're not quite sure when, but upcoming performances of Das Liebesverbot in Donald Pippin's inimitable translating style. It's called No Love Allowed, which is a perfect title, what it's really about. That's Wagner's second completed opera. And today I'm going to talk about that, but I'm also going to talk about Wagner's youth in general, because that's really what's most interesting about this piece. So here's a little assembly of the people who I think contributed to Wagner's youthful identity. You see an image of Wagner in the Senator, and we're finding out whether this is really his identity. We're not sure that it is him. It's the 1844, originally 1844 daguerreotype, which was discovered in the Kaplan collection. There's been some controversy. I'm convinced it really is him. It really is Richard Wagner. So I find his identity. But all around him you see, going clockwise from the upper left, I'll name them quickly, you see William Shakespeare, obviously a big influence and source for Wagner. Vincenzo Bellini, whose operas Wagner conducted and loved when he was a young man and continued to revere throughout his life. His sister Rosalie Wagner Marbach, who was a singer and really influenced Wagner's education and encouraged him, without realizing it, to become an opera composer. Heinrich Marschner, who was a composer at the time, kind of Biedermeier opera, light opera style that Wagner assimilated. Wolfgang Mozart, of course, who Wagner knew, conducted, whose music he knew, and who he conducted when he was a young man. Beethoven, who was, of course, a major force for Wagner. There's a picture, not so familiar maybe, Louise Wagner Brockhaus was another sister of Wagner. She played the piano and she sang. She had a short operatic career, but was, again, an example for him. Then below, in lower right, is Ludwig Geyer, who was Wagner's stepfather. And going around now is, you see his mom, Johanna Pertz Wagner. Then lower left is E.T.A. Hoffmann, who again is a major influence on Wagner as a youth. Adolf Wagner, the one in orange there, just like the Bay Area recently, is Wagner's uncle, who was his caretaker for several years as he was growing up, and a major influence in his development, and Carlo Gozzi. Then in the inner circle, you see just to the left of Wagner, from top to bottom, Wilhelmina Schröder-Devrient, who was a famous opera singer, and again, an inspiration for Wagner as a young man. Johann Büching, people don't know him so much. That's the tiny one right next to Wagner's ear. He was a major collector of old folk tales and legends and stories that he dressed up a bit and influenced Wagner to his fantastic stories that he was devising in his own mind. And then below that, another sister of Wagner, Ottilie Wagner Brockhaus. And then, of course, the other one I haven't mentioned that's above Wagner's mother, is his wife, Minna Planer. So those are the people, and now I guess we should, I don't mind talking to you face to face now. Those are the people that influenced Wagner, and I won't go into all the details. His early biography is very, very interesting. What's interesting is that he grew up in such a literate family. They weren't wealthy. They weren't highly educated in that sense that they had university education and tutors and so on, but they were well-read and they were highly interested in the theater. His father was a theater worshiper, his father who died when Wagner was an infant, and his mother appreciated that. His Wagner's sisters went into singing and acting. One of his brothers was also a singer. So he was surrounded by the theater. He was a theater brat. He was almost a stage brat. I believe he talks in his biography, Mein Leben, about being drafted to play the little kid in some theatrical events. And he was probably hanging around the stage all the time. It was a natural for him, with his sisters sewing costumes and doing things like that, that he had fantastic ideas of how to do make-believe. Doing make-believe was a large part of his growing up. And when he went to school, he was less interested in the studies than in reading fantastic stories and in daydreaming about them. So his uncle encouraged him to be interested in literature, and without realizing it, Wagner took that without his uncle realizing it, Wagner became so interested in writing his own literature that he became a writer and a librettist for himself. As soon as his uncle and his mother found out about that, then there followed a period in Wagner's early teens where they tried to discourage him to no avail. His artistic temperament, his love of these stories, propelled him to drop out of school and to enroll at the university just so he could be close to the action. He got involved with all the new ideas, political ideas of the late 1829 and 1830 when he was 17. And at the same time, he was writing his own stories. He caught the composing bug at age 15. And it wasn't like he decided, I think I would like to write music. He knew what he wanted to write about. And this personal characteristic of having a goal of having something to say and just finding the means to do it is his lifelong, you might say, bedrock of artistic drive that propelled him. So his first literary attempt was a piece called Leopold und Adelaide, and he wrote it then when he was about 14, 15, and then he decided he wanted to write some music for it, but he couldn't read very well, and so he decided he had to study. He studied for 2 or 3 years while he was going to school, high school, and enrolling in college, and he found that he had a story that would reflect everything he was interested in because it was fantastic. It was based on Shakespeare, but not just one Shakespeare play, on many Shakespeare plays. It's a story of a medieval knight who falls in love with the daughter of a lord, and on her wedding night, she's maybe getting married to somebody else. He climbs up to her bedroom and tussles with her, and although she has apparently fallen in love with him at first sight, they wrestle, she throws him out the window, or he falls out the window, cracks his head and dies. And then when they have a kind of, they find him, have a funeral, that this bride expires on his body. So you can see in that the roots of other stories. It's not that the roots of the stories, but I think that these elements kept on coming back as part of the stories Wagner wanted, and we can discuss why later on. So he was a beginner in composition, but he had no fear about just writing it. And the sketches for this opera that he started to write still exist. He wrote a couple of scenes, and then he showed it in confidence to his older sister Rosalie, and she was disgusted by the subject matter. I mean, illicit love, practically rape, and so on. What was her younger brother doing writing an opera like this? And he was so admonished that he destroyed the libretto, and he only kept the score of I guess, most of what he'd written at that time. So I want to play for you now, in a couple of minutes, I want to play for you the ensemble that he wrote, the kind of concertato passage. And this is now at age 18 years old, just barely having started to compose for about 3 years, having worked through other models of, piano pieces and songs, and also writing overtures for orchestra and so on. And he wrote a septet. And this is the point in the story where the young knight has been introduced to the lord at whose daughter's wedding he is there as a pledge of peace between two warring families. And there are 7 people on stage, and each one has an independent line. Wagner was not afraid to stand up for himself and say, if I'm going to compose a septet, I want to make sure each person has something to say, and you are going to hear it. So there is a melody, which is kind of Mozartian melody, that is sung, it goes like this. But the other characters, instead of joining in the melody, have counter lines that they sing. For example, the next one to sing is the lover, but he sings just a kind of almost like a recitative melody. Oh, wär ich nie gezogen, oh, hätte ich etc. Each of the 7 characters, and just sort of brought in helter-skelter, one after the other, sing, so it becomes totally unintelligible. It's, in a way, this is based on the quartet in the first act of Fidelio by Beethoven, where each of the voices comes in, it's a canon, one voice at a time, it's the same key, it's a melody that repeats, but Wagner wasn't interested in running a canon. Besides, with the canon, it would take a long time to get all 7 characters in. So he wrote this with the melody played once, sung by the singer without being played by the orchestra. Then the next singer comes in, sings the melody. It is accompanied. The winds have come in, but first it's only strings, and so on. So the orchestration is very carefully worked out. It's all very intelligent. It all makes perfect sense, and it's bad composition as far as an opera is concerned. So when it comes to a close, it just stops. There's no real major introduction, and there's certainly no coda or any kind of nice conclusion to it. It just ends. So let's hear this as example 1. And you have the text. It was sent as a handout, so you can follow it if you want.
Für Ewigkeit, mein Freund. Wir kommen sein vor, denn bist du ewige Frieden. First,
Okay, I'm back. So you hear that it's a very smart guy who's writing it and very musical, but it's really not an opera composer yet. And when he gives the main line to a soprano, he just throws it in whatever soprano voice is available. So most of the solo lines that you heard of the soprano going up was not the main character, the young bride. It was her confidant. And everybody has a different text to sing. So even if you sort of could figure out what they were doing, you wouldn't be able to understand the words. Now, so he tossed that out, but immediately began to write on an opera that was going to be his major opus at this point, at 19 years old. And at this point, he was kind of mesmerized by the stories of E.T.A. Hoffmann. He actually, his uncle Adolf was a good friend of E.T.A. Hoffmann, who was living in Leipzig, and I think might have composed some music for Hoffmann's. He and Hoffmann were very good friends, and I don't think that Wagner ever met E.T.A. Hoffmann, but he knew about him sort of secondhand very closely, loved his stories, and got interested in this fantastic kind of literature as represented by Carlo Gozzi, who was 100 years earlier, but was writing Commedia dell'arte, kind of bizarre Commedia dell'arte stories. So the Commedia dell'arte characters were there, but the stories were fantastic. Turandot is one of these, by the way. His story Turandot, which Puccini used as an opera, is a Gozzi fable. They're dramas. They're plays, not written out prose stories. They're plays. And in this one, the hero is mating with a creature of the other world, a fairy. In the Hoffmann story, he marries a snake, or a daughter of a basilisk, kind of a spirit world person. In the story that Wagner took for his opera, Die Feen, by the way, I'm not sure that I mentioned that the previous one example was from the opera that Wagner wrote was called Die Hochzeit, the wedding. This is now the second opera is Die Feen, the fairies, and the human prince has disappeared from his kingdom. Remind you of another Wagner opera? He's gone to some woman somewhere, some magical woman. He comes back, and he's lost out because he asked her name. He asked to find out about her, and so he was banished. He wasn't supposed to do that. And the rest of the opera concerns him trying to get back with his wife, who is a half fairy, not a whole fairy, and she has to find her immortality or mortality. He has to find a way of getting together with her, and there's a big romantic story involved. And Wagner wrote a long opera with major pieces in it, already significantly advanced from what we heard in Die Hochzeit. By the way, the character does eventually, to get his wife back, is to go on a magic journey and try to win her back with a magic sword, and eventually with a magic shield, and finally releases her from the stone and turns her back to life with his magic singing with the lyre. Again, reminds you of other stories. All these ideas, what's the word? Fester, boil, they come up in Wagner's mind throughout his whole life. So the ensemble from this opera that we're going to look at is a septet that takes place, again, near the end of the first act. At this point, the main character is a tenor his name is Arindal. Wagner borrowed the names of Arindal and his wife Ada from the names of his Hochzeit opera just for fun. And he has just sworn to Ada, who's pestering him, if you want to be with me, you have to swear never to curse me, no matter what bad happens. This is a test. He doesn't know it, but she has to test his love. And only if his love is, like I might say, is good unto death, will he actually win her, and both can enter paradise. Again, can remind you of another opera by Wagner. So she asks him to swear. Even at the last minute, realizes it's going to be terrible if he does. She says, swear, oh, don't swear. And then he swears, and then everybody stops because it's a terribly dramatic moment that he has sworn this major oath, and everybody wants to know what's going on. Everybody being 7 characters on stage. Only this time, which is now a couple of years later, Wagner is being more intelligent. By this time, he has conducted some 30 operas himself. He's gotten his hands dirty. And I can tell you from being a conductor that the more you get your hands into the pieces and work with them and work with singers and work with the orchestra, the more you understand how opera works when it's good, how opera works when it's well interpreted, how opera works when it's well prepared, and how it doesn't work when it's not. So this 2 years' worth of work that Wagner has done is already showing in his composition. So this time he has 7 characters, but they don't all sing different texts. There are only 4 different texts. So it's divided up. There are 3 lower voice men. The main character is Arindal. There are his 3 henchmen. In a way, they're commedia dell'arte characters as well in this opera when the comic side happens, which it does once in a while. And that's one unit. They start off with a kind of introduction, and they're asking, what was this oath? His wife is terrified. Then the 2 upper voices, the 2 sopranos, sing. They're 2 fairies, they're henchwomen, or I guess you call assistant fairies, to the main fairy Ada, and they want her to return to spirithood. They don't want this alliance between her and the mortal. And so they say, oh, basically, good, he's sworn this oath, he's going to lose her. So they're kind of frisky and happy. That's all his introduction to the 2 other people, the main characters, who sing a duet together. So this is a much more intelligible form to the ear, and you can make a much nicer piece out of it, which he does. Arindal sings that I will keep my oath, and Ada, who is his bride, is the last one to enter, but she sings the most vocal lines. So there's a certain progression between introduction and then song, and then major song of the soprano. And there's a development where it goes off to more remote harmonies, and then it comes back, and then there's a coda, a cadential coda, and it comes to an end. And not only that, there's an introductory phrase that is like a bookends. There's an introductory phrase which comes back at the very end as well. So it's a much better operatic structure, and the harmonies are more developed. So this is Wagner at age 19. This is example 2 from Die Feen. You have the texts.
In Bedeutung
All right, you will notice that I have noticed that this is harmonically and melodically in the style sort of Beethoven, and just after that, Beethoven and Weber and Marschner. It's the harmonies are not at all, advanced. There are some colorful harmonies, like at the beginning, and at the end there's this little sequence. But that's not unusual for a composer in the 1820s. But you also will have noticed that Wagner couldn't resist activating the texture with the men who were as a unit in the lower voices beginning to sing more independent lines and getting in the way of the tenor, who became hardly audible through no fault of his own. It's just that there was a lot of competition for the other men. You'll also notice it's rather long for the amount of text that's being sung. And I wanted to address this because I have a theory about this that I haven't heard people say. They say, oh, Wagner just had a lot to say and he felt things should be dramatic and epic and so on. I wonder whether the fact that Wagner came to art as a child and smoothly developed into a producer, creator of art, wasn't a really important factor. Think of how, as a child, everything is larger around you than it is when you're an adult. So what Wagner's experience of opera and drama as a child was, the length of time things lasted. If he wanted to fill, if he was turned on, if he became, if he fell in love with drama for this big feeling of it, then when he was an adult, and the time spans now, they had to be twice as long as what he had heard as a child to feel like it, to him, like it was the same length as when he experienced it as a child. So it wasn't that he was trying to make art any longer than it had been before. He was trying to make it as long as he had experienced it when he was a child. I know that's a little theory that I have about it, that I haven't heard people mention, but I think there's some validity to that as a reason. All right, the third opera, his second complete opera, is Das Liebesverbot, and this as a kind of reaction to the serious fairy story that had this serious Germanic music to accompany it, was based on Shakespeare. Again, he had written an earlier piece, as I said, that was inspired by Shakespeare. And we have to really understand this, I think we have to remember that Wagner, as a young man, got involved in the experiences that young people were having with the new social order, what they hoped would be the new social order being ushered in by the July Revolution in Paris and the Polish uprisings, all in 1830. That's when Wagner was 17, just about to enter his kind of high school years. He became a university student just so he could get involved in this kind of university atmosphere. He trooped around with the students who were doing demonstrations. He nearly got arrested. Later on, as you know, he was even more active in revolutionary activity. And he felt that the new way was really important to pursue in his art as well. The new way being down with the old order, down with these rules, down with the rich people and these aristocrats who were just feathering their own nest and keeping the common people down. After all, Wagner was not an aristocrat. Wagner was of the middle class. So he took Shakespeare's play Measure for Measure, which was about the imposition of strict social order against the drives and the normal instincts of everyday people to have love and sex and so on. And in Shakespeare, there's a whole interplay of guilt and innocence and weighing things in the balance and power and so on that Wagner understood very, very well, but took from it only that there was a puritanical ruler who was banning love, and that somehow the people under that were going to overcome this restriction. And so the heroine of the story, Isabella, is the one who breaks apart the newly instituted ban on love, because the ruler had applied it to his sister. Now, naturally, Shakespeare set this in Austria, so he wouldn't have to set it in London. He just picked Austria, and they all had Italian names. Now, what Wagner did was to say, okay, fine, Italian, let's make it in Italy. And he set it in Sicily, the hottest place he could think of for hot, wild-blooded activity. And the ruler then was a German. So his indictment was against German morals. The German's name is Friedrich, as opposed to Angelo in Shakespeare. And Friedrich is a base. And the ban on love which he institutes is this. As opposed to the festivities they want to have. They want to have a festival. They want to have the carnival. And he says, no, it's going to be no love allowed. And this is the basic conflict. And Wagner now, in this opera, began to use the emotional quality of the melodies to attach to dramatic ideas. It's the beginning of the process of making leitmotifs. So let's see, I'll skip, because I'm going so slowly, I will skip telling you a lot of the detail of the plot. Let's go to the ensemble, which we're going to demonstrate. The ensemble is the moment where Isabella, having had a private audience with Friedrich, in which she pleads for the life of her condemned brother because he had sex with a girl and got her pregnant. He's under penalty of death. She goes to Friedrich and says, you must talk to me in private. This is the courtroom. He says, no. She says, oh, please. He says, okay, everybody go away. And they have a scene together, which is a duet of fairly long proportion, in which she tries, the first part of the duet is where she tries to make him change his mind. And the way she does this is by singing a three-part song to him. She starts off very gently, saying, oh, don't you understand sisterly love? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Sorry, folks. That's what I'm going to demonstrate after this ensemble. After this scene, which I'm about to describe to you. It's all right, I'll describe it now and we'll sing it later. And she gradually gets his attention, and he becomes sexually aroused by her beauty and by her fervent plea for love. And he says, okay, I'll grant your brother clemency as long as you sleep with me. Of course, that's not what she meant at all. Besides which, she's a novice in a nunnery. She couldn't possibly do that. And so she calls everybody back in and says, I've got to make a big denunciation. There's a terrible man here. And everybody comes running in, waiting for what she has to say. And while they're waiting, Friedrich says to her, aside, he says, listen, they're not going to believe you. I'm known as a Puritan. You know, if you said I was going to kill you, they might believe you. But if you say I'm going to make love to you, they won't believe you at all, because that's the guy, then nobody thinks I'm that kind of a guy. He's a hypocritic ruler. If there ever are such, maybe he was one of them. And so at that moment, the action stops and we have a concertato passage. Now this time, it's truly in Italian style. There's several elements that make it very clearly in the Italian style. First of all, the formulations are quite clear between the chorus, or a group of accompanying voices, and the solo voices as separate. The formulation of the phrases is just like a Rossini ensemble. I believe this is heavily influenced by Rossini's ensembles. By this time, Wagner had conducted both William Tell and Barbara of Seville. And the formation also, let me just play one phrase here. They start off, you know, now, that big forte chord is straight out of comic Italian opera. This is no comedy, but Wagner is using that kind of punctuation that is used to indicate the end of the first strophe and do something different, so that when you repeat the strophe again, you're not just going on. There's a little bit of a bump in between one strophe and the next. So he starts off with that. He builds up the texture. He eventually brings in the soloists. Now, here's something. The first two ensembles that I played for you were 7 characters each. Here, there are 11 soloists and a full 4-part mixed chorus, or 4, 5, 6-part chorus. And they're all on stage, but Wagner now knows what to do to make the whole thing come to life full-bloodedly, but clearly and intelligibly. He divides the principals into high voices and low voices. They work together, but you hear two strands within that accompanying texture. Then he brings in the chorus at the same time, whispering or almost humming underneath, that he brings the first major solo singer, which is Friedrich, who is singing, oh, she's so beautiful when she's angry, basically. And he's still looking forward to somehow getting her in his grasp, because she actually has agreed to meet him. So, right? Then when she comes in, she sings a higher cantilena, which is appropriate for the soprano. But what I find most interesting is, whereas everybody else is singing the same text 3 or 4 times, she plays a scene. She doesn't repeat any of her text. She's going through a thought process. So in that freeze frame moment, time is traveling for her, whereas it's a standstill for everybody else. So there is a counterpoint of temporal frames, which is a really advanced dramatic device for Wagner to be using at age 21 or 22 when he was writing this. And it has the same form. There was a little song introduction, then the soloists come in and they sing their melody, then there's a part where they go on to some foreign harmonies, and eventually they all come back, and when they come back, she sings her phrases. She's talking to herself, not in a highly embroidered major soloistic way, but subtly. There is some embroidery and a little bit of melisma, just a hint of melisma. And at the very end, you won't hear it, but at the very end, when after the last chord of the ensemble, and of course there's the obligatory last ending in the orchestra. The orchestra starts ending, and she says, Mariana, Mariana. She starts her next thought over the end of the orchestra. So again, Wagner is having the beginning of an idea of how to make a drama work without coming to a major stopping point. Yes, there are articulations. A piece has its end. But as the piece is ending, it's going to take off into the next scene. And this is another trait of Das Liebesverbot is a very sophisticated use of beginnings and endings. There are a lot of places where you just use the standard, like when you go, or like happens in Bellini. The same kind of thing happens throughout this opera. There's a lot of these Italian stock elements, stock bits, but they're beginning to be put together in service of a dramatic thought and dramatic enterprise to build a piece that goes way beyond the limits of the form as it was received by Wagner. And he's only 22 years old when he's writing this. He's writing in another style, but with ideas of his own. So let's hear this example number 3 from Liebesverbot, the concertato.
Sie schneidet in Sturm und Schmerz, was hat ihr vertraut? Verwunderung erfüllt mein Herz, dies vor der Lösung graut.
All right. I hope you realize how much better a piece it is and how it has more flow to it. Of course, writers about Wagner have concentrated on the style. Was it a French style? Was it an Italian style? Was it a German style? They generally say that Die Feen was his German opera, and Liebesverbot was his Italian opera, and then Rienzi was his French opera. But I'm more interested in how he was developing just as an artist, because he wasn't just saying, I'm a German artist, definitely never saying I'm a French person, right? But he was just trying to write the best opera he could in the manner that would say what he had to say that nobody had said before. Now, a little bit more about Liebesverbot. That's what I'm really supposed to be talking about today, I guess. This piece is written in set numbers, and it's written with divided recitatives. There are actually one or two secco recitatives, which sound very strange. And he just has the strings doing pizzicato chords. And they sing a little, like a Mozart recitative line, and then, you know, and so on. There are some sections, at least two sections, where it's spoken dialogue. So the form is a mishmash. He's not trying to write to any particular tradition. When he writes his arias, he develops these forms, as I was saying, like a cavatina cabaletta, or like a strophic aria in the as normal when the carnival happens. The tenor Lucio sings a 3-verse comic song with a little dance interlude in between each verse. So Wagner is not inventing new forms the way he was going to later on, but he's pushing the boundaries where necessary to say what he has to say. So in this scene, which I outlined before, where Isabella is pleading with Friedrich, who seemed like he's made out of marble, as they say, his urine turns to ice. That's what the phrase is in the Shakespeare. I'm not sure that Wagner used it, but he used similar expressions about how such cold German he is, as opposed to we. We are warm Sicilians, and we want to have love, and we want to have the carnival. What is this guy doing, repressing us with his uppity Germanic laws? That's the basic premise. As I said, let me demonstrate again. I wanted to demonstrate not only this original, this original motive of the love, the love which is being denied. That is, the ban on love is this motive. And then, as opposed to the festivity of the carnival. And then there's another motive that goes like this. It doesn't get developed. It flows out, and it flows out again, and it flows out again. This is just love as an energy force that comes through a person. It happens both for Friedrich and for Isabella. Both of them that have this melody underlying what they're feeling. The interplay of these two different kinds of music happens a lot in the recitatives, where something is illustrated by a tune which kind of shows the emotion behind it. On the other hand, he's only 22 years old, and he doesn't have a lot of different ways of making recitatives. So in this piece, somebody sings a few syllables, and there's a big crash in the orchestra, another 2 syllables, another crash. So this recitative style is rather primitive by later 19th century standards. But when he starts to write real tunes, he writes beautiful melodies. As a matter of fact, it is amazing, from Wagner's first compositions for orchestra and then his first compositions for voice when he's 15, 16, 17, he has the feeling of how to make a melody work. That is his strongest impulse. And it comes from growing up with 2 older sisters who were singing opera. I'm convinced of that. He learned from the harmonies. He learned from listening to Beethoven. He was a very adept listener and absorber of musical material. But that feeling for the voice, of course, even when he's writing for a huge orchestra and the voices have to be built up with new technique to sing them, there's still the feeling of a voice singing out. And in this time, in the 1830s, Wagner writes about this. He didn't write so much later about it, but at this time he writes, what's wrong with German music? It's all intellectual. They don't know how to make the voice sing. And Wagner complained about it not because he thought it was hard to do. He could do it. He knew how to do it. He had worked with Italian opera. It came very naturally. So in these 3 melodies that Isabella sings, she starts with this slow song. It's almost in the manner of, I don't know, Schubert, Weber, later Beethoven. And it has some feeling of the Italian cantilena, but the structure of it, the way it moves, is a little on the square side. but melody, you know. That's a slow melody. That's the first verse she sings, just saying, do you know what family love is like? If you knew that, you would not deny my plea. So it starts in a very soft, modest way. So this is going to be the first of these three songs. And to sing all of them is going to be soprano Charlotte Khuner. Do we see her yet? There she is. Okay. Charlotte Khuner, who, she's not distanced from me. She's my daughter, and we're in the same room together. That's how we can play. We can play at the same, this is live music making, as you've heard sometimes on the internet in these days. Okay. So this is Kennst du das Lied? What? Oh, thank you. Since we're two people in the same room, we have to make sure we're all using one set of microphones. And then Friedrich will answer her very briefly. Now comes the second stanza, because she sees that he's not stone cold against this. He hasn't indicated any leniency yet, but she is encouraged now to open up her heart more warmly, which she does in the second. And now there's a little introduction. And this is one thing, by the way, that I find maddening about this opera, because the melodic impulses, the forward dramatic impulses are all there, but yet he hasn't been able to divorce himself from the style where before the singer sings, we have to have an introduction. So the singer is going to sing a melody or beginning of a recitative, and the orchestra plays 8 or 12 bars just to get into the mood, which doesn't quite work in a comedy as well as it does in a serious opera. So I'll play a little introduction, and now she sings. We're just going to play one part of the second section, because the second section he goes into some quite extensive melismas for the soprano, and I don't want to spend time on that. I want to talk about the melodic formulation, but I want to let you know that they're there, and we will go on to the third song shortly. But now this is the second verse, the second stroke, but it's an entirely different melody. That one sounds more like Bellini than it does like Beethoven, I think. So Friedrich now is physically moved. She sees that. He doesn't answer her much, but she sees and takes heart from the fact that he's really listening to her attentively now. And she sings the third verse, which is that melody that I've told you about. And the words to that are, O war dein Herz denn stets verschlossen, drang Liebe nie in deine Brust. Haven't you ever felt really strong love, she's saying. So what the music is illustrating what it's like to be overcome by the power of love. However, we're going to sing the latter part of this just to hear the cadence and the ending of this third strophe of an aria. Now, what's interesting is it's a hybrid form because it's a three-strophe aria, but the three verses are different. Usually, a three-strophe aria has the same tune 3 times, but in this case, it's 3 different tunes. It's a mishmash of that with the cavatina cabaletta form, where it's a slow aria and then a fast response when something changes in the situation. Well, something is changing, and she sings faster. This is an allegro. The earlier part was an andante, but it's still the third strophe of a 3-part aria. And to make sure we feel that, Wagner, at the end of this third strophe, brings back the end music of the first strophe because she's reiterating the same idea. She hasn't gone on to a new idea. She's gone on to a new level of energy. So this is the third strophe of this little song in the middle of a duet in the middle of a finale. And that love thing takes on. So I think that you'll agree that this is a professional job of writing good songs for a soprano to sing. And that's why I think Das Liebesverbot really deserves to be heard, not just as a historical nicety or oddity, but because it represents a forward step at that point. We're talking about now, what is this, 1835. This is really a development of opera, even though he's not a finished opera composer yet, even though this piece was a total failure. He had it performed once. I mean, Die Feen was never performed. He shopped it around and nobody wanted to touch it. He went with Das Liebesverbot because he had a job in a theater. They said, yes, we'll produce this opera for you. He was going to use it to help raise money for himself. They're going to have 2 performances, but he had to rehearse it on his own. He taught it to the singers. He rehearsed it with the orchestra. It came to the first performance and it wasn't ready. Now, I know the pain of this because I've been involved in performances which aren't as ready as I would like them to be. And it's very, very painful as a conductor. And if you're the composer as well, it's got to be totally a nightmare to have this piece almost ready to go, but in the actual performance, all the coaching, all the singing along with and gesticulating and so on that he had done in rehearsals, he couldn't do. And so the performance was simply bad. And the audience didn't understand it, and nobody came to the second performance. And then the second performance, it was a half hour before the show, there's practically nobody in the audience. And the soprano who was singing, Isabella, had a husband who was quite a madman. He was very jealous of her, and the one who was playing her brother, Claudio, in the show, it's not really a love interest, they're brother and sister, but the husband of the soprano, thought that she was having an affair with this tenor, the second tenor of the show, and he came bursting on, and he chastised his wife and started beating her up. And then he went to the tenor, and he started beating him up, and the tenor got all bloody, and the performance couldn't go on. So that was the end of that production of Liebesverbot. And then again, Wagner shopped it around, and nobody was biting. He wasn't an established composer, and it was just nobody wanted to do this. This kind of, the subject of the piece was a little bit revolutionary. It was saying free love, right? Down with the aristocracy, up with free love. And I don't think they bought that either. So he eventually gave it to the score. He gave up on that. He was writing Rienzi, going on to his next attempt to win over the operatic world. And eventually, 30 years later, he gave the score to his patron, Ludwig, with the inscription, Ich irrte einst und möchte es nun verbüßen, wie mache ich mich der Jugendsünde frei? Ihr Werk lege ich demütig dir zu Füßen, dass deine Gnade ihm Erlöser sei. In other words, I made a mistake once, but now I would like to make up for that. And how can I make up for my youthful sins? Well, I'll give it to you and let you be the redeemer. I don't know whether he thought that maybe that Ludwig would pay for a production. I think he just wanted to make a play on the fact that he was going to ask Ludwig to redeem his whole life by giving him a lot of money. All right, so now, you might have noticed in these sections that I just was playing and Charlotte was singing that it somehow becomes more and more Italian the more emotional it gets. But there's a certain Italian vocality that Wagner uses in this whole opera. And when he has a chance to have two soprano voices together, you hear it sounding almost like Bellini. I'd like to play part of the duet that the two sopranos, Isabella and her friend Mariana, sing. They're in a cloister, and they first will hear the chorus of nuns backstage singing a little hymn, a Salve Regina, and the music may remind you of some other music that you might have heard from Wagner a little later on. And then they sing a little duet about how nice it is, how peaceful here in the convent with nobody to disturb us. Singing the part of Isabella again is Charlotte Khuner, and singing the part of Mariana is Gillian Khuner, who happens to be my wife, and we all live in the same house, so we're not breaking any rules by all being in the same room together and singing this duet from, it's number 3 from Act 1 of Das Liebesverbot. I have to mute myself. So Wagner, when he gets the two voices together and has a moment that he can let them soar a little bit, he does that almost in the manner of Bellini. Now, on the serious side, and by the way, there is even much more on the comic side in this opera. It's rather splendidly wide in its dramatic scope because he's trying to incorporate as much of the Shakespearean ethos, dramatic ethos as he can. So there are characters who are quite low class. There's comic and slapstick interactions between them. In the finale, say in the second act finale, there's something that's almost straight out of Mozart, almost out of the Marriage of Figaro, with two people hiding, watch the other two people thinking they're making love, but actually making love to the wrong person, and so on. This is not in Shakespeare at all. This is Wagner's invention to make an opera from the Shakespearean framework. But there is a serious side. The serious side is mainly this rigid autocratic ruler, Friedrich, and he is not as self-reflective as the Angelo character in Shakespeare. He is aware that he's committing a sin by trying to seduce or basically rape this young woman. He knows that it's not really good to murder people, but he's going to carry out those plans anyhow. Now, in the pocket opera production, singing this role, I'd like to introduce Spencer Dodd, bass, and he's going to be appearing in the production. Hello, Spencer.
Hello. Thanks. Hello. Thanks so much, Jonathan. I just want to say thanks to everyone who is able to make it out here today. And I'd like to say that unfortunately, while I cannot sing live directly with Jonathan, I can, fortunately, sing with him with a backing track. So we've worked together to work out some tempos and whatnot. I have a speaker system behind me, and I will be singing Friedrich's aria from Act 2.
Okay, I want to jump in now because I want to introduce this piece a little bit. This is Angelo, who is alone. This is Angelo, who is alone in his room. He's about to meet Isabella, the object of his affection, so to speak, in the carnival. So he's going out on a limb here to meet her in public, but she has agreed that she will sleep with him or have a tryst with him. It turns out he's actually going to be meeting his own jilted ex-fiancée, but he doesn't know that. And in the middle of this scene, he gets the note that she is really for real going to meet him, which makes him even happier. And then later on, he decides that he is going to not release Isabella's brother even after this tryst. He's going to have him murdered because he can't have somebody who could tell on him around. And you will hear in this echoes of the motives that the little melodic snatches that I was telling you before. Okay, so I'm ready. I will mute myself, and Spencer can take it away.
Great. Thank you all so much. All right, so let's take it away. Gazing at Isabella, I learn the fear of love. My frozen heart dissolves in tears of rapture. The melting breeze of southern skies stirs torment ashes into a fire, and though the way of death there lies, I revel in this fierce desire, and though the way of death there lies, I revel in this fierce desire. I revel, yes, I revel in this fierce desire, this fierce desire. The melting breeze of southern skies stirs torment ashes into fire, and though the way of death there lies, I revel in this fierce desire. I revel, yes, I revel in this fierce desire. Isabella, and tonight, at the end of the corso, what, in a mask? She will be there. Want to search of bliss unbounded, she awaits for me this very night. My pride and principle surmounted, I luxuriate in love's delight. Transported on a wave of passion, I go beyond the formulas of wrong and right, far beyond the formulas of wrong and right. But shall I set a brother free? Can rule of love be discarded, though I give way to love's command? No, the law must yet prevail, though by that law I die as well. Claudio must die, though I go next. What are these demons that pursue me? What is this fever so enthralling? The blood is boiling in my veins. I can't contain the fire no more. Oh, cruel joy, delicious torture, when death so close to love may dwell, my cup of overflowing rapture obliterates both God and hell, obliterates both God and hell, obliterates both God and hell, obliterates both God and hell. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Spencer. As I said, Spencer is in the cast of the pocket opera production, sometime we hope in 2021, of No Love Allowed, Das Liebesverbot. I want to thank him. I also want to thank Jillian and Charlotte earlier. And just a couple of comments to wrap up before we go to questions and answer. I'm not trying to say this piece is a masterpiece. There are, as I mentioned, these kind of hackneyed riffs and ordinary vocal turns and harmonic formulas that were just drifting around. But there are some genuinely inspired moments. In the last act, as the last act wears on, as opposed to any other Wagner opera I know, including Die Feen, the music actually deteriorates in quality as you get towards the end, and the use of the chorus becomes quite ordinary and not very colorful. But the dramatic structure of the play does come to completion. He crafted a very, very fine libretto. At this point, he was a better librettist than he was a composer, but his composition was getting better and better each time. And I think some of the basic ideas in Liebesverbot that really recur throughout Wagner's life is that the artist must always strive to improve, always getting better. Love is great. It's the greatest natural and sometimes supernatural power, but it is disruptive and even subversive. Any artificial superpower or any artificial power that's trying to press it down is opposed to love, especially that of the material world. And it's the duty of love to try to overcome that. It's the duty of a composer to try to overcome. How can a composer overcome by that motive? Well, maybe he can change it. Instead of, he can turn it on its side, on the upside down. It becomes, or, as opposed to. Anyhow, that's my last thought for the lecture, and I hope you enjoyed it. And now follows the question and answer if Terry is here to deal with that. Terry? I don't see her here, Terry. Oh, she's coming on. She's waiting in the wings. There's dramatic entrance for you.
Thank you so much. I want to tell you that the chat has filled up with bravo, bravi, thank you, applause, 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 and we got a big one at the end. Bravo, Spencer. Thank you so much, Wagner Society. Wunderbar. Vielen lieben Dank an alle. I can't read this here. On everything. I'll just say that. Wunderbar, brava, tutti. So, ladies and gentlemen here, our guests, thank you for being with us. We open up our Q&A and this is a list of our singers. Thank you so much, Charlotte Khuner, Jillian Khuner, and Spencer Dodd for giving us your time this afternoon for these wonderful musical examples about Das Liebesverbot, which we look forward to very much in 2021. So if anybody has a question, please kindly type it in Q&A and we will answer them in the order that they're given. And understand, please, that sometimes the same question will be asked more than once. And I don't have any open questions just yet.
Well, then I'll say something else.
Yes,
as long as
people have, talk until.
Yeah, I have more to say. I just want you to get your questions in. I really would prefer to answer questions, but I'll say that I mentioned that the opera seems to fail in its energy in the end of the last act. Wagner was, I think, wanted to make sure that the very, very end of the opera was the biggest splash. So he reserved for the end a big march for the offstage orchestra and the onstage orchestra together, and they were a big festive march because the original ruler, for whom Friedrich was simply the stand-in and substitute in this plot, returns to set the community back into its proper course of allowing love, etc. And that is a 5-minute march where nobody is singing. People are just parading around the stage. This was Wagner's idea of how to put the cap on an opera at this time. I think that his heart was more in the real heroic endings than it was in some kind of a comic ending. Of course, you could fault Shakespeare the same way. Usually, Shakespeare's plays don't end very operatically. Everybody says, "Okay, it's fine, we're done. Thank you very much." But in this case, there's a big chorus and then this actual march at the end.
Yes. One of our viewers here, Trish Benedict over in Rossmore, said she saw the original pocket opera and was underwhelmed, but after reinvestigating, this gives her more interest in seeing it when it is presented. And I hope my volume is good enough now. Might pocket opera consider defaying it sometime? Well, pocket opera, all of the English translations of pocket opera have been done by Donald Pippin, and he's well into his 90s, and I don't think he's doing those translations anymore, and it's not in his list of operas that he has translated into English. So no, I don't think so. Let's see. Would history have been different if the tenor hadn't been bloodied? That's what Karen Gabrielson asks.
That's a good question. I think not, and the reason is that nobody bought tickets for that performance anyhow. It was supposed to be a fundraiser. The way it was working, the first performance, the proceeds went to the theater Wagner was working for in Magdeburg, and the second performance, the proceeds were supposed to go to him, and there were no proceeds. So he would have been in debt and probably had to get out of town anyhow. Well, he left Magdeburg because the theater collapsed, but also because he had run up a bunch of debts, as usual, as was going to become his usual. And he went off in 1836, went off to Königsberg, I think, and then got married and tried his career from there.
We have a question from Nicholas Aliaga. Where do you think Wagner succeeds the most in this piece?
I think he succeeds the most in the delineation of the characters and in the electricity of all the duet scenes and most of the choral scenes where people have something to say and underlining dramatic moments in the plot. It's a very, very skillful use of music to build up to the point where something happens, something changes. Even if his technique was still that of a very young man and a fledgling composer, the whole first act has a wonderful structure to it. It does flow on the glacial side, and that we are able to ameliorate to a very great extent by cuts. Everybody cuts this piece. Nobody does it entirely. And the cuts that Donald Pippin put in, plus a few more that we're going to be adding, make a show that is really very well paced. And I think that Wagner does have a sense of the flow of the drama and the succession of the scenes and the contrast between a heavy dramatic scene and a comic scene. It's all really done in a very sophisticated way.
I have a really good question from Jose Padilla in Mexico. Thank you very much. I have a question. How different is it to prepare the first Wagner dramas compared to the later ones? And Jonathan has a tremendous amount of experience in that regard. Thank you, Jose.
Okay, it's very different because the vocal requirements are very different. The kinds of voices that would be singing this opera, which are the lighter voices, voices that would be singing, Norma and so on, are quite different from the voices later on they're going to be singing Brunhilde. And the same thing is true for the men's voices, not to that great an extent, but to the same. I mean, you have people who sing Don José and then they sing Siegmund. But once you start singing Siegfried, you're not going to be singing, Count Almaviva in Rossini, Barbiere. However, one thing that is similar about this, because of the enthusiasm that Wagner had for the voice, is these parts are even now very strenuous. They don't go to the highest note all the time. They don't have to sing across a very big orchestra, but they sing a lot. And that the dramatic quality of the climactic scenes is demanding. For example, when Isabella calls in people, I said that she calls them back into the courtroom, she has to go to up an A flat 10 times and up to a B flat. When she calls them in later on, she has to do the same thing. She in the last act finale, and she's calling them in because she's going to finally unmask him. Unmask Friedrich, she goes up to a high B, like 6 or 7 times to call people in. This is very strenuous writing for the voice. And Wagner simply, he was young. He said, "I have the singers here. I'll write it for them, and they'll sing it." Right?
Okay. Elaine Meyerhofer asks, where in this early opera are the seeds of the ring, if any?
Well, if you listen to the Ring carefully, you will hear in every opera the old formulations of the voice sings and then the orchestra has a chord and the voice sings again. So this is from the recitative style, accompanied recitative style, where the orchestra is not playing a rolling accompaniment, the orchestra is trading with the voices. And in this opera already, Wagner is writing accompanied recitatives where the orchestra makes a statement in between the voices, one voice phrase and the next. It's not just chord, voice, chord, voice. It'll be chord, voice, orchestra commentary, voice, chord, voice. He's already developing the orchestra's commentary on the vocal line. That's one major way.
Okay. Robert Connor has a question. What are the best DVDs recordings of these two operas? And I don't know that there are any DVDs, but I know there are some CDs.
Yeah, I don't know of any DVDs. There are a couple of CDs.
There's a complete set now of all of the Wagner early operas.
Is that the Wolfgang Sawallisch?
I think so, yes.
Yeah,
and it's out and it's very inexpensive. And yes, it is quite good. I have it ripped to hard drive and then donated it to the Wagner Society. So yeah, that one's definitely a good one. Another this is just a comment from Chung Wai, and he said that Pocket Opera may set up a program for future translation projects. So don't rule out Defean for now. Okay, then there was another one over in chat from one of our colleagues on the West Edge Opera. Peppy Ross asks, clearly, Wagner's politics changed from objecting to German strictness to supporting Nazi regime. Nazi regime hadn't happened yet in Wagner's time. That's his forebears, his progeny who were in that program. But how did his political affiliation affect his music?
Well, as I said, this youthful rebellion is very much embedded in this particular opera. Funnily enough, in the preceding opera, Defean, and this is, I think Dieter Borschmeier commented on this, and by the way, I say that the people that I read who discussed these pieces very intelligently were Dieter Borschmeier and Ivan Nilges. They both have very intelligent things to say when they talk about Wagner's early opera. What Borschmeier says is that this is the Defean, not Liebesverbot. Defean is the only opera that celebrates conjugal love and the preservation of the family. That is the goal of that opera, and it actually happens, but it's like magic, almost like it couldn't happen in the real world. It only can happen in your imagination. But as to the politics of Wagner, he never became such a revolutionary that he said, down with the monarchy. I think he always wanted to have a ruling class. He just wanted to be a kindler, gentler ruling class, and he wanted it to embrace more people. That's, I think, the political underpinnings of The Ring. I'm not sure that you can say that either the other three really mature operas, by that I mean Tristan and Meistersinger and Parsifal, are strongly political. That's not their issues. Their issues are about life and death and sex more than politics.
Now, one of our members, Stefan Lazar, has made a note here. There is a Blu-ray of Das Liebesverbot available from a production from Madrid. I don't know what label it's on, but you could probably find it by rooting around a little bit. So did we have any more questions? I think I saw Bradford Wade is put in a request. And he better leave something in the tip jar on the piano. Might we hear some of the festival music?
Okay, I'm going to play a little bit of the some snippets from the festival music. I'm happy to oblige. First of all, the festival opens.
While you're looking, I will comment that Stefan has added that Liebesverbot Blu-ray is on Opus Arte. Okay. And then some others are asking, are there any plans for a Zoom mini ring, Jonathan?
Talk about tip jar, that would help.
Yeah, tip jar would definitely help.
So this is the opening of the finale where the festive is starting. This is what I'm talking about when he has the typical just spinning things along by repeating things in little sequences and so on. But that's the first melodic. All right, and then Lucio sings his song, which is actually the only part of the Liebesverbot that was published during Wagner's lifetime, besides the overture, was this song of Lucio. I think it was the first part that was published. And by the way, Wagner uses castanets and tambourines and so on. But first, as an introduction to the song, there's this festive motive. All right. On for more than that. Then he sings this song. Ihr junges Volk wirft euch heran, la la la, die Alltagskleider abgetan, la 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 la. Euch vor der Jacken an, die bunten Wärmer angetan, la. Also heute ist Beginn der Karneval, wir an einer sich bewusst. And then, as a refrain, he has to sing. He has to go. I can't do it. It's hard for a tenor, maybe easier for them than for me. So that's the kind of festival music that he writes. Very, very jolly music.
Yeah, I noticed that at some points in Liebesverbot, when he gets all the clattering, banging stuff coming in, it reminds me a lot of Mozart's Inführung. The Janissary music, and it just, every time I hear it, I think of Mozart. And you know, composers borrowed from people. I also got a love note from Kendra Sharet. She wants to send her love to everybody and say thank you, thank you, thank you. And yes, thank you back, Kendra. You're a wonderful artist as well.
Right. I have one thing to say to anybody who's a musicologist out there. In the finale, at one point the finale stops and there's a duet between two sopranos. It's different. It's Isabella this time with, no, it's the same two, Isabella and Mariana. And it leads to an arietta sung by Mariana. And here's the music. Right, and she sings too. Where is it? She goes. So that little phrase here from this, that use of the augmented triad is something which in tender moments Wagner was going to come back to, most notably in the Siegfried Idyll, or in that part of Siegfried where Brünnhilde is singing her love for the basically the prenatal love that she had for Siegfried. But this whole passage doesn't connect to what happened before or afterwards. And I want to know from Wagner's sketches, which I can't look at now because they're in libraries and you can't get to the libraries during COVID crisis, but I would like to see the sketches and see whether he didn't insert this because he wanted to make a present to the tenor. He was a leading tenor, and his wife was singing the role of Mariana. And I wonder whether he didn't, to like keep the company together, say, okay, I'll add something in sweet here for the two ladies to sing. You'd have to look at the sketches for the libretto and the sketches for the opera to see whether that's added on or was part of his original conception. Because what happens before he ends, and what happens after that makes sense following it, which is, but instead he goes just from the ending, the something, to, which is not a kind of connection he makes anywhere else in this opera. And from the end also of this little, what I think of as an insert, it ends, and then you go to, but from there to there is a very weird connection. Anyhow, that's a musicological question that I have formulated from my study so far.
Yeah, that was one of the comments that came in, is that Vienna State Opera did a shadow puppet, Die Feen. Also, Glimmer Glass was scheduled to do it this summer, and of course their canceled production, but they did a capsulized shadow puppet version of it, and they had two singers in it, and I'm trying to think, they had a narrator. And so Eric Owens was narrating it.
Great.
And it was quite lovely. And they did glimmer, they call it the Glimmer Glass Glimpses. I think that's what it is. I'd have to look it up to be 100% certain. But they did these capsulized presentations of all of the works they were intending to present this year, just to have something for their singers to do and to keep out there in front of everyone. So I admire the ingenuity of all of the musical organizations that are trying to keep music out there in some form or another for us. And I just heard yesterday, Michigan Opera Theater is going to do Götterdämmerung in a parking structure. And they have hired big singers to sing in it. I know Christine Gerke is going to be singing Brunhilde in a garage, with a garage band, as it were. So there's some hope out there and some new ideas, people pushing the envelope. It's still on okay, someone said it's still on the Glimmer Glass website. Yes, I think I might have said that. At any rate, we are having immediately after, everyone who signed up for this presentation today, and thank you, nearly 100% showed up today, there will be a coffee klatch. So if anybody is interested in coming and having a live chat with Jonathan, we'll be convening that at 3 o'clock, which is in just a few minutes, give you a chance to get a snack and something to drink and use the facilities, and then join us. It should be in your email, and there's a link there to get into this. It's going to be a Zoom meeting, so the meeting protocols will be available. You'll raise your hands and so on and so forth, and it will be conducted that way. It's a webinar format is a little bit more difficult to do those sorts of things while we're broadcasting. So I don't see any more chat. I don't see any more Q&A. I want to send a gigantic thank you out to Kate McKinney, who's been answering questions in the background. And also, we could not have done it without Emma Popek, who was absolutely tireless in working to perfect what we had and keep everything going, and she just worked so hard behind the scenes. I can't do it without these other people behind the scenes helping us out. And here's the slide is up with the coffee klatch information there. Join us. Jonathan will be with us. I'll be with you, and it'll be a lot of fun. And then our next webinar coming up in September, Emma's going to put up that slide. We have Simon Williams, who was in the audience today. And he'll be with us in our next one. And beyond that, we also have Professor Catherine Sire, who is on the faculty of UCLA. And she'll be talking about, talking about Wagner's Beethoven essay. Here it is, yes. And Chung Wai is saying, thank you, everyone. We thank you, Chung Wai, for programming.
Thanks.
Yes, so there we have it. October 24th, Simon Williams, and November 7th will be Catherine Sire talking on Beethoven's essay of, Wagner's Beethoven essay of 1850. So I think I see some more chats. I think those are probably just thank you so much. Fabulous people. Bravi to the Norns. The Norns are the ladies behind the scene. And so on. I think that's what we got. A lot of people said, I wish you could hear my applause. I'm standing and giving you a bravo. So that's really warms everyone's hearts to hear things like that. And Jonathan, thank you so much.
I want to thank you. I want to thank you very much, Terry and Emma and everybody. And don't take too seriously what I said about the last act flagging. It is very entertaining all the way through. Only the music is not as good. It's a great quartet that doesn't work musically quite as well, but it really is a piece that you should come in here for its own pure entertainment value as well for its historical value. So support Pocket Opera and come to the show when we do it. Thanks to Pocket, thanks to Wagner Society.
Yes, so we're delighted to have you, and yay to Jonathan the Khuner's from Chung Wai. Bernice Lindstrom says, thank you, bravo. So it's really wonderful, everybody. All your reactions are just tremendous, and we really do appreciate you and the number of people that signed up and attended today. So hopefully we'll see a lot of you folks at our next session at the Coffee Klatch at 3. And then at our next webinars, you're all welcome to come and join us for those. They're all free. Okay, so with that, I think I'm going to say goodbye to everyone. Participants, you can leave. And bravo from Houston, Texas, from Robert Connor. This is all great to see where people are from today. So we'll see you in the Cafe Klatch.